else's
That's
fault.
for me too. Welcome to the Church of Mabus radio show. It's Friday night. It's 7:08 p.m. Central. We're all still alive. And we got Wham and Stephanie Quick and Dr. Megan Rose with us tonight. Stephanie Quick, how's it going, Stephanie?
It's going great. I'm real excited to have this conversation. I have an interest in this whole erotic encounters with discarnate beings of various ontological statuses. So I'm super excited to be here.
Good to have you here, and good to have our guests, and good to have Wham here. Just one thing before we start, and I'm going to be very short on it. And I try to avoid political stuff for the most part, but I just want to keep saying this because I think it's important. I keep seeing people in exopolitics and UFOs and paranormal, like James Gillian, who owns ESETI Ranch, put out a newsletter saying Putin's taking out the garbage in Ukraine. There, and where I see stuff at before it's news, the stuff there is painting Putin into a hero that saves children, and because he's after Nazis, it's okay to go there and splatter everyone. Well, there may be Nazis there, and yeah, Nazis probably deserve splattering, but the whole population doesn't deserve splattering because there are Nazis there. We have Nazis here. Does that mean my grandmother should be splattered all over the pavement? No, it doesn't. It's just disturbing how many people are getting behind this notion and they're okay with it. And they're trying to paint Putin into, I don't know, Hitler, Napoleon. And people even in America are like, yay, Putin. Like, it's creepy, scary. But that's all I want to say. And then the weird stuff in exopolitics, Putin's going to Ukraine to hunt space arcs. That's why he's there, because he's looking for the Ark of the Covenant. It's like, what is that, Indiana Jones Part 8? I don't know what that is. But my point is, just be careful. That's all I want to say. But let's get to our guest. Good to have Wham here. Good to have Stephanie here. Good to have Dr. Megan Rose. How you doing, Megan? Good to have you here.
I'm good. Glad to be here tonight.
And your book came out, Inner Traditions, and Spirit Marriage, Intimate Relationships with Otherworldly Beings. It's Bear and Company, but I know they have different subtitles for stuff. But I guess tell us about the cover. Is that like Kronos, the horn god? Who's the chick?
The artist.
Oh my God.
The horn goddess. The artist
Pretty.
was Houston. He was an LA-based artist, and when I was down in LA, and about 5 or 6 years ago, actually doing interviews for the book, I went into the Last bookstore, which is this really cool bookstore in downtown LA, and she had a pop-up shop in there, and I walked in, and there was this image, and I was gobsmacked because it's very much, when you read my story in the book, it's very much representative of my personal spirit marriage experience. And so when, Inner Traditions said, oh, we're working up covers for your book, I was like, that's the cover I want. So that I was pretty thrilled that Liz was on board with that and that we could get that cover art. But yeah, it's the being is sort of a male being that is part tree, right? This sort of tree god, and then this sort of horned goddess, and they come together, and like I like to say, wackiness ensues.
Well, it looks great. It's good art. If I could, I'm going to let Stephanie or Wham ask a question. I can still hear the show, but I had a bee apocalypse, and I thought the bee was dead, but it's right there. And I will be listening, and I'm not going to be long, but please.
It's a zombie bee, Jeffrey. Watch yourself.
It's huge. If it hits someone, it's terrible. It's a hornet. But I'll be right back, and I'm still here.
Okay. So, Wham.
Yeah.
You have questions? Or you want me to?
No. This is more your area of expertise than mine. So, I've had afterlife. I've had a few, I guess, moments of tango. I don't know what else to call them. I certainly have had other life connection, contacts, but I haven't had like ongoing situations with people. because I don't know. I don't know that I'm open to it. Hold on just a second. See, I've got some issues here. Hold on.
All right.
Oh, Megan,
Down
looks
to
like
you
it's you and me. So,
What a chaotic evening. Sorry about that.
well, it's
Okay.
on point, Megan, for your book, because one of your points, and I want to say first of all that I was able to get a copy of your book, and I've read it twice,
Ooh.
like about once and probably about 90% again. And it's excellent. If anyone is having these type of experiences, or they are interested in them, or think they are possibly interested in pursuing a spirit marriage, that part of their spiritual life or expression, I can't recommend your book enough. And also, if you are let's say skint or whatever, or you're just a little trepidatious, Dr. Rose has an excellent website, and she has a ton of videos and some papers, all free online, and covering really a whole lot of material that's in this book. Very interviews with people involved in spirit marriages through various spiritual and religious traditions, and with all different type of stories and kind of personal lifestyle situations. And so if you just want to kind of dip your toe in here and there, and get it that way, it's really a blessing. As I was saying, Megan, we were talking before the show, I've had an interest in these type of experiences and relationships for, I don't know, the better part of 30 years now, due to some weird experiences that I had. And actually starting out with most of my experiences have been with like living suspects, let's call them, or people who twig to it, right? But still in a kind of a like added, what's the phrase, spooky action at a distance? I guess it'd be sexy action at a distance. But anyway, and so it's just, I am thrilled and delighted to be able to have this material out there. Just anything really is wonderful, but it's such a high quality and so thoughtful and so heartfelt. And I think that your kind of foundational principles about how to approach these type of relationships make a lot of sense too. So that said, so Dr. Rose, if you could just talk a little bit about your own personal spirit marriage. It seems like you have had a relationship with Gwen, right? Is that how you say it? Gwen, for a number of years. And one part that I was a little bit wanted to know more about is like in the like kind of the very first intimations that you might have had that someone else was kind of sniffing around, as we might say. How did that kind of come up in your awareness, and how did you interact with that, and kind of like about how many years has it taken for you to evolve in your relationship?
Yeah, well, I mean, in some ways, I like to cast all the way back to like how I was raised, because I was raised
Yes.
in the Pentecostal Christian tradition. So, I like to say that right out of the womb, I was being steeped and seasoned by a tradition that practiced the gifts of the Spirit, right? Speaking in tongues, laying on of hands, channeling of the Holy Spirit. So that was just sort of the water that I swam in growing up. And I developed from a very early age a very strong bonded relationship with the Holy Spirit, which, as I went on to study spirituality and religion in seminary, I really understood to be the divine feminine, the goddess. And so that relationship was really foremost and primary in my life, and has been my whole life. But around the age of 30, so about 20 years ago, I began to have dream encounters with a spirit lover. And at first it was kind of like, well, this is nice. This is fun. And I didn't think much about it. I thought, was it, an actual entity? Was it just um, an erotic dream I was having? I didn't really care. It was fun, and I was just sort of going along with it. But then at some point, maybe a couple of years in, that encounter, that being that I would have these dream lover encounters with, which, by the way, I should say, sort of shape shifted a lot for me.
Mhm.
I didn't show up with the same consistent look, but the feel was always consistent.
Yes, that's one of the points in your book that I really like is a lot of people get focused on how they look, what's the name, what's the this, what's their address in their past life, all this type of stuff. And I think that in my opinion, that's not what these experiences are about. Like you can go to the library and look stuff up, right? This is about like a felt experience.
Yeah.
Same as like and how it affects you personally and the quality of your. It's like like if you're going to have a lover in this life, right? If they put on some weight and they're still that same person with a great sense of humor and they're caring towards you and all that, right? You're not going to be like. All of a sudden I wanted to swear and I can't, but you're not going to be losing your cool over it, right? Because that heartfelt connection is still there. And that felt, yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think that the importance is less about the visual. I mean, and I talk about in the book how that the visual of otherworldly beings and the way that they show up visually or even how they sound is more of a language to them. It's to convey a certain message or a certain meaning or a certain purpose, particularly when we're talking about disincarnate or otherworldly beings. And depending on the class and the cosmology of the beings, like some more fixed entities like a deity will have like a form that is kind of their true form, and they often, and because that there is a lot of practice built up around them, a lot of worship built up around them, they're more fixed to that form. My contact, my beloved, is more of a fairy and underworld, Celtic underworld kind of being, and their form is not as fixed. They also have been worshipped by large groups of people for unbroken lineage, thousands, hundreds, whatever of years. It's their practices are being kind of resurrected by contemporary pagans. So there's a lot more mutability there, and as a result, when this being started showing up, I didn't really know what it was, but at some point, like I was saying, they asked me to marry it. And that's when sort of my like, like, what's going on here? That to me was noteworthy. Like that was different than any of these other things. And I remember that first proposal was a lucid dream as well. And so it was something that was very remarkable and really got my attention. And that's when I like to say I'm a practitioner scholar. So I'm a scholar of religion and psychospirituality. And I'm also a practitioner holding a few different lineages. And so that's when I sort of put my scholar hat on and was like, okay, let's study this. Figure out, what this is, this spirit that's asking me to marry it, hence the term spirit marriage. Even though I didn't realize that there were any contemporary practitioners that were doing that at the time, I just knew about the anthropological and the historical accounts. So that really became the kernel that precipitated the research. And then I would go on for another 10 to 15 years researching the material as a way to try and understand who this contact was, and why it was asking me to marry it, and what the meaning and purpose and outcome of the relationship was meant to be. So it took me quite a while to get a name and to finally say yes to the marriage, because I was like, I'm not saying yes to anything or anyone that I don't really know.
So, let's see. So, in that first couple of years where you're just kind of like, oh, this is kind of fun having these dreams, like about how often were you kind of feeling like they were happening, if you don't mind my asking?
That's a really good question. I would have to go back to my journals and look. The one thing that I did do that was a huge gift to myself later on was I took copious notes. I really kept a very detailed dream journal during those years. It really depended. It was maybe a few times a month.
Okay, yeah. So he was interested.
active. You know, it wasn't every night, or even necessarily every week, but it was enough for me to be like, oh, that was a visitation dream again.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know, one of the things that I also did that I really encourage people to do is, if you're starting to have these kinds of contact, I went and found a mentor, someone who held a spirit marriage already that I knew, liked, and trusted, or was getting to know, and I got them on my sort of like checks and balances team to make sure that I was really vetting the experiences that I was having and the being and the entity that I was contacting, because you know about, you know, I knew about the anecdotal stories of like incubi and succubi, and I really wanted to make sure that it wasn't that sort of a situation. Hence me taking my time getting to know them. But you know, so I had a spiritual mentor, and I had a really amazing transpersonal psychotherapist who was a trained shaman. So that was someone that was not going to discount these experiences immediately as like, you know, diagnosable DSM kinds of encounters, but that would also really help me discern, right? Like that discernment piece of what is an inner aspect, what is wish fulfillment or wish projection, and what is verifiable contact.
So I'd like to drill down on this aspect a little bit, because I actually have lived for many years in Berkeley. I've spent a lot of my life in the town of Berkeley. I grew up in the Bay Area. So for me, when you say, oh, go find like a mentor of someone who is, you know, has a lineage holder, a spirit marriage, you know, you go to Berkeley, you could just find one there.
Berkeley.
What did you say?
I said, throw a rock and you'll hit one in Berkeley.
Thank you. That's it. Yep. But I have this conversation with different people at different times, but not everyone is living in like Berkeley or whatever. So let's say you're out like in the middle of Ohio or something, this starts happening. How do you have any ideas for people on how they might try and access that type of help?
Yeah, well, I mean, a couple things. That's why I wrote the book, right? Because I like to say I wrote the book for myself 20 years ago because there was nothing out there, and I really wanted to, you know, really it was my journey of trying to find information, and then there are in the book there are a number of different traditions, and as you mentioned, my YouTube channel, I interview a lot of different people from different traditions, and everyone that I interviewed for the book. I interviewed 9 different practitioners in 7 different traditions. And everybody that I interviewed, they are all ministers or medicine keepers or wisdom elders in their tradition. And so they all have traditions that you could go to and potentially learn about. And then, you know, myself and my practice is really designed to support people who maybe a lineage-based tradition isn't your, you know, your cup of tea, and yet you still want to be held in a community and with a guide that can really help you ground these experiences. So I have both a public spirit marriage discussion group on Facebook, and then I have courses that I run and groups that I facilitate for people who are interested in or in spirit marriage type relationships, so that you can meet other people, right? It's sort of, I call it normalizing the paranormal. It's normalizing these experiences and understanding that they are a valid psychosexual encounter. Well, not even all the time sexual, but you know, we've been talking a little bit about the eroticism of it, but that's not necessarily the case for everybody. Not everybody has erotic encounters.
Well, I thought that was fascinating as well, because I have a little bit of an anthropology background, and so as you know, marriage is a social institution, and I really like that you addressed that. You know, the community aspect and the fact that this is a like a socially recognized relationship. And you know, I mean, you can look at well, like royal families, right? You know, you're making an alliance, you know, diplomatically. It implies a mutual obligation, certain responsibilities. Usually there's a creation of some type of well, you know, traditionally children, but something towards the future, carrying on of the line, the tradition. So that all can happen, you know, separate of any really erotic encounter, or even that type of romantic affection or whatever. So I thought it was interesting too, because I know other instances where, for example, I have one, he's become a friend through many discussions on this, but he's a young man and he's in a very conservative area, involved in a Christian church and everything, but he's had these very powerful encounters with his lover who died. And, you know, it's hyper erotic, I guess is the word, when she visits him. But also, he's had like huge changes in his personality. It's completely revamped his views of women, which have been kind of, you know, objectifying and conservative before. And then also, he's had a lot of these very cosmic experiences of her and Sophia, the divine feminine. So it's like completely blown his mind, but he can't talk to anyone about it because, right? So it's interesting how you have like these various aspects in different relationships. With him, it's like, but it's very sub rosa, so it doesn't have that kind of real community connection, except for in these, well, like right now, the community that I'm talking to now about his experiences, and with his lover, who's, it's funny because I've actually felt her, because I've been speaking for years now, and I really have felt her presence at times, and it's just like so formidable. And I just feel like a big weenie in front of her because she just so but yeah, so I like that you address that in the book, where, you know, it's not, because of course, you know, the sexy part is, you know, exciting, and it, you know, kind of, I don't want to quite say salacious, but like more, you know, get people interested. But a lot of it has to do with, like you're saying, creating a certain structures of stability in the community between the human and the divine.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that the erotic aspect of it, you know, our human bodies only have certain registers for contact, meaning like a certain touch that facilitates arousal. We almost immediately interpret as erotic, right? But it isn't necessarily the intention, right? If we're aroused by a sunset or a beautiful, like, yummy meal, which we can absolutely feel arousal from, it doesn't mean that the sunset or the meal was trying to arouse us. That's
How dare you? Yes, that baked potato was trying to arouse me.
There's probably I know there's a potato out there.
that's
Trying
not
it.
not just a potato. You know, the most luscious food in the world is this lamb curry from it's a Madras curry from southern India that is made with peppercorns, and if I put it in my mouth, I just want to lay on the floor.
yeah.
I
So
mean, seriously, it's like, just coat me with this. You know, it's completely erotic.
I mean, the Tantras totally understood this, right? So I'm, one of my lineages that I carry is Shakta Tantra, or goddess-centered Tantra, and from the Eastern lineages and traditions. And that is part of, right, the practice of taking a sacred sexuality, right? Taking our sexuality or eroticism to a place of refined, ecstatic exaltation in the body, and food and wine and sensual experience is key to that. But like with these spirit contexts, it, by and, you know, 9 times out of 10, at least for the folks that I interviewed, the point of humping and pumping wasn't necessarily the intention of the spirit, right? It was the byproduct of what our nervous systems register as as the interface point. And apology, I don't mean to be flip or crass about it. It's just that we think when that energy, what I call vitalism, right? When that vitality arises inside of us, it usually starts down in the root, and and if allowed, it will suffuse our bodies, right? And that is sort of the practice of sacred sexuality, is to suffuse the entire system, nervous system, not just like the genitals or the creative centers. And so these otherworldly beings, particularly beneficent, beloved kind that we want to be in intimate relationship with, when they encounter us, or when we encounter them, when there is a contact that's happened, often our body registers as that as erotic, because their frequency, particularly in my case, with the fairy people and other primordial beings like deities, the way our body registers that is this sense of arousal, because their vitalism is unbridled, right? It's raw and it's potent, and it's just like, whoa, it sets everything singing in the body. And so we can easily sort of like interpret that as, oh, this is a sexual encounter, and it's not necessarily incorrect. It's just a small piece. Caroline Kenner, who I talk about in the book, an interview in the book, talks about this kind of sexual or intimate encounter is meant as a kind of attunement, a kind of activation, and even a sort of healing for the human that is being encountered in that sort of a way.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, and I agree with it a lot. Actually, Wild Trees is a biologist who has been doing some work on. He's interesting, a young guy, but he talks about the various energies that we put off, and how us becoming more excited could like facilitate a poltergeist PK or something like that, just because we are actually in certain states putting off more energy. And then I had been doing a show with Rojan Reservoir and Project Archivist and AP Strange, and we were talking about humor and the paranormal, and how humor can help kind of balance out certain kind of fraught or scary or nerve-wracking kind of psychic or paranormal situations. But then also how it seems like, and I think with this as well, that heightened emotions seem to kind of facilitate psi expression and communication. And so it seems to me in certain cases that you could have, I don't want to say, if a being is helping you get worked up in whatever way to help, get something across to you, right? That doing it in a sexual way, I think, could happen.
Yeah, well, and we understand, again, from the tantric worldview, that there's this vitality, the Shakti Kundalini, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
in everybody's body has this, and in some tantric traditions, that is the indwelling of the goddess inside of the human body, and that can be stimulated and awakened. And when it does, there is a kind of full body orgasmic exaltation that happens, and a lot of traditions talk about how that rises up and sort of creates the flowering lotus at the head, or the cobra, right? But in the tantric traditions and in the Taoist healing love traditions, it's not like an up and out. That flowering happens, but then you circulate it back down and in and through the body, and it becomes what's called the microcosmic orbit, right? Or the movement of the Ida and the Pingala through the central nervous system, and becomes a refinement tool, becomes a longevity tool, and can give rise to all sorts of interesting co-creative projects. Is doing these kinds of practices, and deity yoga is a beautiful tantric practice that teaches one how to do this. First in yourself, and then with a visualized deity lover, and then often with a partner where you're aspecting your deity, they're aspecting their deity, and you're working this this channel or circuit together.
Yeah, I always think that's such a profound practice, because the way that like other people can see you and mirror your best back to you. I mean, even if you think about like having a good friend or like a supportive parent or a boss, that they kind of have this, they can see you in this kind of exalted aspect, even if it's like just exalted human. And to do that type of practice with a partner, I think is very profound. And even if you can't do it for yourself, you could do it for someone else lots of times. So, and I think that says a lot about, just the power of marriage and that type of intimate relationship
Yeah.
there. So, I had a question from Tui Snyder, who is an author, and she is interested in a lot of stuff. She's very interested in reading your book, but she was wondering as well about how do you tell, because you mentioned like incubus, succubus, how do you tell if it's something like an incubus, succubus? How do you protect yourself from getting involved with something that's not going to be helpful or possibly deleterious?
Yeah.
Just how do you develop that whole aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question I get asked a lot, and
Mhm.
I mean, not to be flip, but it's like, how do you tell if a human person that you might want to be in a relationship is going to be a good relationship or not?
And that I say the same thing.
You
It's
take
that it's the
time,
truth. Yes.
you get to know them, you test the spirits, you do the processes and ask the questions and learn, the effect that they have on you. It requires a certain amount of knowing yourself, right? And knowing um, uh, your own sort of internal guidance system. Hence, some of the practices that I put in the book around like really getting to know your inputs and your response to people. It's challenging. It's more challenging with a spirit because you don't have a physical person right there to bounce off of, and that's why I do recommend having a mentor or a guide or a community that can really help you discern what because we also know that spirits can masquerade, right? They can say, oh, I am Archangel Michael, but really that's not actually what the spirit is that's presenting. And so divinatory tools, right? Having a really robust set of divinatory tools and really beefing up your ability to discern, but also I am also an initiated ceremonial magician, and I initiated into ceremonial magic because it gave me a really kick-ass set of um, discernment and space creating tools, so that I could say, "This is my space, and the only thing that's coming in here is the thing that I say yes to." And then I even took it a step further and said, "Okay, this is my space, and I am working with this one deity." The goddess, and in this case, I was working at that time exclusively with her face as the goddess Isis, and I was like, Isis, you're my bouncer. You're my go-to person. I will only work with beings that you bring to me and vet and say, this is an okay being for you to work with. And so I developed this set of tools from a few different traditions that I initiated into to really be able to um, first of all, devote myself to the relationship and to exploring the relationship. So there's devotional aspects where you really build up the form of the beloved, of the contact. I really discerned and learned how to discern their contact and the effect of it and what I wanted to say yes to and what I say no to. And that was also a really big piece of my research, is like, just because these spirits are reaching out wanting a relationship with you doesn't mean we just bow down. Oh, spirit, do whatever you want with me. No, we push back. We set boundaries. We get to, because they do things that we can't, but we do things that they can't. And so we have a
Yep.
tremendous amount of agency and sovereignty in this. And the third was the disciplined practice, like daily having my rituals, having my practices that both protected and also connected me to them, because you cannot develop a relationship with anyone if you don't spend time getting to know them.
I absolutely endorse that, and my own particular style of protection and training and everything is how I structure my subtle body and space is very different from like a ceremonial magic or something. However, um, you have those procedures and you have those protections, and I really can't endorse enough when you talk about having a big bad or big good deity that you can trust, um, and that you can kind of have them as like a gatekeeper or someone to pull your hiney out of the fire, um, because if someone is legit, if they, have good intentions and a good heart and that type of thing, then, they're going to be cool with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had, and this is just a personal thing for me, which I found was very interesting reading your book. So when I was about 15, I became really ill, and it was probably like an autoimmune thing. I was kind of like asthma, bronchitis. I missed almost all my junior year of high school, and I became ill off and on. And since then, anyway, when I was, I guess, 2021, I ended up in the hospital. I was like really ill with this lung trouble, and I was not getting any better. And so they did a medical procedure on me, which ended up putting me in convulsions for like 20 minutes. And so I had a big near death experience, which it ended up being very much like a kind of Tibetan Buddhist flavor to it, although I don't even know if I knew Tibetan Buddhism existed at that time, because this is like in 1982 or something. Anyway, but so it was like this completely frightening, terrifying, overwhelming void experience that I was thrust into. No body, no DNA, nothing, just like this speck of consciousness. And I was terrified, but there was a presence there, like a kind of like a composite being, and they were just like, "We are here if you want." So I said yes, and then I got like a lot of teachings and experiential practices, a bunch of stuff. So I've had this relationship with them ever since. But I did, like you said, for years afterwards, they kind of gave me principles and practices and stuff, and so I would test it however I could find to see, does it seem like this is true or working? Because it's like really weird to have like this realization in your head that like we're all connected, when I'd been very well trained in like science and logical writing and art. So it's like I knew, okay, all those ways to know something, but then all of a sudden you just kind of like know something without any of that preceding it. I was like, wait a second. So in a way, it's kind of like a marriage, and although there's never been that ceremony, and that it's like this ongoing alliance that I could access them for anything that I basically want to know at any time.
Yeah.
For decades now. But it doesn't have that kind of the formal marriage, or the like affection, romance side of it either. Though it does have the aspect where every time that I'm speaking with people or writing or talking about any of this stuff, I'm definitely drawing on everything that I've learned from them and the training that I've had from them and stuff. So I thought that was kind of interesting, because in a way it would kind of fit that model, which I never thought of it that way before.
I like to think of it like a spectrum of contact, right? Because what you're describing are familiar spirits, right? What we call in the witchcraft tradition a familiar spirit. And that is like a tutelary spirit or a spirit guide, some sort of entity or group of entities that walk with you and that are like there, and they have your back, and you have a very bonded relationship with them. And then there's like channeling contracts, right? Or mediumship, where you're talking to a spirit and it might come in or it leaves, and there's this sort of discrete, intro and outro, and they leave sort of like a spark of their blessedness, but it's not like a constantly there conversation. And what I say with the spirit marriage, and again, like these are all valid spirit communication practices. The spirit marriage is just like one aspect of it that I felt like hadn't really been explored or discussed, and that is when we and I specifically focused my research, because my dissertation needed, you need a narrow enough subject matter that you can actually use the research, process.
Oh yeah.
So I looked at the bonded, intimate relationships with people who had gone through a kind of a ritualized marriage.
Yes.
That was what was really interesting to me, that there was actually a ceremony and a ritual in many of these traditions that was oftentimes witnessed by the community, although not, that's not the only way that it can happen. And that was that fostered this indwelling. So I use the term marriage because people understand what a marriage is by and large. Although, as you said, there's many different ways that marriage has shown up historically.
Yeah.
But some of the other terms that are used for this are the indweller and a merge. And that is when a symbiosis happens between the human and the otherworldly being or beings. And there's this sort of co-creative consciousness that is formed from the two. And as one of my mentors, Orion Foxwood, likes to describe it, he closes his eyes and he sees into his fairy wife Bree's world. And when he opens his eyes, she sees into his world. So there's this sort of co-walking consciousness that happened as a result of this bonded relationship. But for years before the marriage with Orion and Bree, she was just a powerful familiar spirit, a tutelary spirit that taught him about ecology, that taught him about the fairy folklore, fairy work, and a variety of different things. She was this powerful earth nature spirit. And so, and I discovered in my research that can be the case, right? You can start off in a kind of familiar spirit relationship, and then at some point the deepening or the more advanced marriage needs to happen, usually because that there's some sort of co-creative project that the two of you together need to bring out into the world that is, for whatever reason, not as achievable any other way. Certainly, this book was my co-creative love child. Orion likes to call it my love child of my relationship with my spirit beloved. And the interesting thing is, in the Vodou tradition, the Haitian and New Orleans Vodou tradition, one might marry more than one. In their tradition, they're the Loa, or the deities. You can marry more than one, and those relationships can actually change. Just like in human marriage, you might be married to someone for a period of time, and then later on you might marry someone else. In that particular lineage, you can be married to different people. It's not necessarily till death do you part. Although in the case with the fairy marriage, it is a very arduous, usually 7 to 9 years to go through to the full marriage. And so once that happens in that tradition, it's kind of like, for life and lifetimes after.
Yeah. It's fascinating. There's another couple things that well, Tui Snyder was asking about is like, well, what is the I don't want to say, what does the physical human person think about, their spouse or their partner having this deity squeeze on the side or whatever. And then also my friend Alex Bullen had a couple questions, but he was asking too, and I think you made that clear, that it's just like some type of formal actual marriage ceremony taking place was how you kind of approached it, people, for your book.
Yeah.
But
somebody who's gone through some sort of ritualized union. Although Caroline Kenner, who I mentioned, in all of her marriages, I think they were all happened in like a lucid trance state, where she was in the trance and the deity appeared and said, "I want to marry you," and she agreed. And so that was a little bit different than some of the other stories that I shared and collected. But my own story was more along those lines. So it does run the gamut. But, also in Caroline's case, she's a pantheist, so she's working across a variety of different traditions with different deities from different traditions, and she has also divorced a spirit.
yeah.
So that was noteworthy, because that some of the other folks that I talked to, that wasn't an option for them. But again, it depends on the entity. It depends on the tradition.
Yeah. I liked Orion Foxwood's image of, closing his eyes and seeing her in the back and forth, because I know a number of different people that have these like strong empathic relationships just with other human beings. And you could kind of have that, literally that sense sometimes that someone's like looking through your eyes and seeing what you're seeing, which is like a really kind of uncanny So I thought he captured that quite well. That sense that you're kind of sharing a consciousness and each other's can be very weird. Um, so, but yeah. So my friend Alex Boland, who's a writer, had a question. Yes, Wham knows him. He's very funny. He was accusing me just the other.
Look at the cum clads.
This is terrible. So, speaking of whether or not
this is not an F word. No,
this is not an F word. No. But speaking of entity, let's see. I was on Twitter. I was sexually objectifying an atmospheric phenomenon, and so my friend Alex accused me of being a cloud lover. And I told him, no, no, no. And then I went outside and it rained on me, so it made me a liar. I know.
Sure, if you're into that sort of thing, you know, golden showers and all.
Oh my God. And it was terrible because I went on a walk later, and then there was like a rainbow that was like coming right out of our house. I'm like, oh no. But at any rate, so he was asking. Now you have a great section in the back, and it has like a lot of very practical tools in your book of if you want to cultivate a spirit marriage, and a lot of what we discussed already about developing your own practices of discernment and discipline. But he was wondering a little bit more. Let's say you don't really have the feeling of any prospects around. Let's say, is there a way that you could go about enticing some attention?
Yeah. So I like to say we don't necessarily always have a what we would conceive of as an external entity ringing our doorbell, showing up with flowers and candy and wooing us.
Ringing the devil's doorbell, maybe, right? Mm.
But we all
I'm seeing the devil's emoji. The little purple devil's emoji. Yeah.
So, but we all have a divine self that is actionable, right? We all have, and this is a concept that is transcultural. This idea that each of us have an expression of ourselves, an inner aspect, and divine or highest self that we are here to be an embodied expression of, right? Jung called them archetypes, and if you really understand what Jung was talking about when he was talking about archetypes, they weren't these psychologized beings. They were like actual aspects of the divine, because when you look cosmologically at divinities across pantheon, they all have these archetypal qualities that they're expressing. But the Vodou practitioners call it the Matet, the Tantrics call it the Ishta Devi or Ishta Devata, and it's one's chosen deity. In the ceremonial traditions, we call it the holy guardian angel, and this is your patron deity. And each of us have one that we are here to be an expression, a flavor of, sort of their finger touching into the realm of glasses and cell phones and notebooks and like things that like get moved and created and pushed around, the incarnate world. And so we can absolutely reach out and woo that divine aspect of ourselves and get to know them. In fact, in the deity yoga practices, that's sort of where you start. Who is your Ishta Devi? Finding that divine self that you are an expression of, that you're a flavor of. And maybe there's more than one, right? Maybe there is a certain way in which you show up in the world. You were talking before off camera about a friend of yours who was stepping into a marriage, and that had brought out this like love quality. So maybe it's a love deity or a deity of creativity and sexuality. And those deities have different names, right? In different traditions. So find, or maybe you have more of a scholar energy, or more of an underworld, seeing in the dark kind of energy. So find a deity or deities that align to that, and look at devotional a relationship with them, a relationship that when you get to know them, and by merit of getting to know them, you know thyself, or you get to know yourself more deeply. And I at first thought that these were sort of like apples and oranges. So it's spirit marriage with an external deity is over here, and the divine self stuff is over here. Never the two shall meet. They're two totally different things. Until I interviewed Kama Devi, the Shakta Tantric, and she went through a very elaborate search for her Ishta Devi in North India, and discovered that it was the goddess Kali. And then after stepping into initiatory practices with her lineage family and devotional work with the goddess Kali, a few years into that, the goddess married her. Kali married her. So she's both in a wedded relationship and a divine self relationship with Kali. And I thought that was super exciting, because that says to me that's a possibility, right? It's a possibility to marry oneself, if we're talking about like capital S self, this deity. And I think that that tracks certainly to my own experience with, as I was talking about the indwelling of the Holy Spirit and the goddess, and the kind of deep, bonded, committed relationship I have with her as my primary relationship. So, she is my primary relationship. I have a human partner who I've been with for 11 years. I have Gwen, who I have been with since, the story with Gwen is that that's a relationship that I like to call it a marriage vow renewal, because that it became pretty clear through various divinatory and discernment practices that Gwen and I have been married lifetime after lifetime, and that there has been a matrilineal. I come from a matrilineal line of seers, and the women in my line have been married to Gwen generation after generation. It sort of fell off when they converted to Christianity, but I'm kind of revitalizing that practice. So these can be ancestral familiar spirits that are passed down through lineage. And there's plenty of research and documentation out there around familiar spirits that follow family lines.
So now I'm interested about because if it's been these women in your family over the ages, so how has your relationship with Gwen affected your relationship with your ancestors?
I think I got to that because one of the first things we do in fairy seership. So I'm a senior seer in the House of Blue Fairy Seership. It's Orion. It's a folkloric fairy tradition led by Orion Foxwood. And the first thing that you do when you step into fairy practice is you begin to do ancestral work. You spend a couple of years working just with the ancestors, because they're sort of the gatekeepers to everything. And my most immediate ancestors, my mother and my grandmother, are no longer living.
Mm.
And they were also very Christianized. And so they weren't open or talking to these practices. What happened was that my great aunts, my great grandmother began to show up in dreams and visitations. And they sort of started opening the book of the family history. And through these extraordinary dreams, I began to sort of piece this all together. So it was kind of like the relationship with Gwen was happening, the relationship with the divine self was happening, and the relationship with the ancestors were happening sort of simultaneously. And I was having to sort of weave all of these different threads and navigate it kind of all at the same time.
Yeah, I think that really gives people a feeling for because you talk about like the transformative effect of these relationships, and I think if you imagine yourself dealing with all of this stuff all at once, with all this information coming on these different ways, and getting these different entities coming to you and interacting with you, that people, I mean, it points up the need for discipline and developing discernment and having a type of practice for yourself and ways to create like your own space. But and the importance of taking your time with it, because it'd be a lot. But then also you can see how this could really, if you're able to go through these type of processes and resolve some of these issues and stuff, it could be a very powerful, transformative experience.
Yeah.
So
I had the gift of being able to do this as my dissertation research, right?
yeah.
That is
And
a gift. That is a gift.
yeah, yeah. And that was why, because I needed to be able to like weave all these different threads and have like, and at first I was just trying to research it on my own, right? And I had a very powerful, guiding or a precognitive dream. And in my dream, I had finished a PhD and I was teaching this material. And I saw the room that I was in. I was having a conversation with a colleague, and I saw the room that I was in. And I woke up from the dream, and I was like, "Oh, I think I need to go back to school and do this as a formal dissertation inquiry." And when I found the school that I went to, when I went to interview there for admissions, the room that I walked into was the room in my dream. And so I knew that I needed to do this research in a particular way, because also, this material can be very ungrounding. I mean,
Oh yeah.
in general can be very ungrounding. And then we're talking about adding eroticism into that and sacred sexuality into that. And it can be very ungrounding and triggering for a lot of people. And so I knew that I needed to do it in a really grounded and structured way that the academy is really good for that, right? It gives you like, here's your protocol and here's how you're going to do this. And that was a gift to be able to do it in that kind of a way, because that it completely dismantled me. I mean, doing the research and going through this process. And I'm not the only person. When I interviewed my co-researchers, Orion talked about being taken to the brink of death in his case, going through the rewiring process for the marriage. So it's nothing that you want to rush. It's I tell my students again and again, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Take your time.
It's funny because when I have my near-death experience, and one of the first practices that they gave me is like, you need to walk every day.
Yeah.
And that's just, I mean, it sounds so prosaic and everything, and it is, and that's part of the point. But anyway, so I wanted
to ask something real quick. I guess my thing is, I know this kind of stuff happens, but I'm just trying to understand it. And sometimes it's too much for my Georgia, I think, to try to understand, but I'm trying. And I know in voodoo, they do stuff like this. I've interviewed people about voodoo. I guess with my experiences, most of them have been kind of like the Riddler, showing you something really fast. That none of them, like for instance, just my story shortly, at 17, I had testicular cancer and went through chemo and all that crap. Then a few years later, my dad died, and I began to have experiences that were UFO related, seeing beings of light, seeing different beings, little cloaked beings standing around a black box. But a lot of these experiences seem kind of like the universe showing you something, like puzzle pieces. And like I know I've been in presence of certain beings that I didn't understand, and I felt them. Like I know there's times I've done psychedelics and I felt like a dragon was holding me in its hand, and I felt that dragon energy. And it's kind of why I'm a Capricorn and have some interest in Vlad the Impaler and those dragon energies. And we've had a lot of people on about shamanism and things like that. So I understand being in those presences and them activating stuff and you feeling different from that. But I guess I'm trying to, most of those experiences, like it seemed like something that would go before your eyes really fast. They never really tried to, interact. It was more like just seeing something. And you're like, what the hell was that? Did you see that? And then most of the times people with me, yeah, I see that too. And I've had beings of light standing on a cloud with a friend that both saw this being of light standing on a cloud looking down at us. And we were like, do you see that? Yeah, I see that. But they were quick. And then later you question, did that happen? But it did. And sometimes you can go to those people and ask them and they don't remember a damn thing. Like it never happened. I'm like, what? And like, you were there. But I guess I'm trying to understand when it happens. Is it ever visually? Because a lot of my experiences, I've seen beings with my naked eyes completely sober. I've seen them in altered states of consciousness. But what are some of your experiences like? Have they ever been visual, or is it always in a dream state? I guess I'm trying to understand it more.
Yeah, like the how it's perceived.
Yes.
I asked that of all my co-researchers as well, Jeff. I was like, How do you experience it? Do you hear a voice? Do you see? Do you feel? The majority of people talked about more of a somatic or a felt sense, although the visual, I kind of get brief flashes of visual, usually in not with my physical eyes, but with like the inner eye. So there's a practice where you work with the inner eye and the inner visuals that manifest, and part of that is that and Stan Groff talks about this. He's a transpersonal psychologist, and he talks about how we don't, the sense that we want to trust the most is our felt sense, because the eyes and the ears can really deceive you. And so what we're trying to go on is more of the felt sense as well is more hardwired. Our somatic sense is more hardwired into non-ordinary ways of knowing. So but that being said, I do scrying work, and I have seen in my scrying work um, images of the beloved, and I know that um, that we also do a kind of soft gaze scrying, or a soft gaze focus in both the fairy seership and the tantric, and often I will have visuals that way. But the visual, everybody has different extrasensory gifts, right? Not
Yes.
And not everybody is visually oriented. And the way that I was taught was that you go with what is strongest for you. You don't try and like push through if you really want to see something visual and you're just not a visual person. If you're more of an auditory or a somatic person, you sort of develop the muscle around what comes easiest to you, and often those other gifts will start growing as a byproduct. And that was certainly true for me. I went with somatic, and then my auditory and my visual acuity really came on board later on in the process, after doing a lot of work around the somatics. So the visuals aren't unheard of, and even physical manifestations, right? So in the accounts, you hear
Excuse me. Sorry about that.
Bless you.
well, at least it wasn't a burp.
At least it wasn't a bee.
I could arrange that.
Oh my gosh.
Where was I?
And also
Sorry
what
about
I'm
that.
trying to, like, let's say we're all gonna croak at some point, but when you croak, are you gonna go off with this thing into Avalon? I mean, what's going on? How's your lover on Earth? He's like, where are you going? What about me? I mean, what do you think about these kind of scenarios? I think about death every second, but
Right.
hey.
Yeah, my partner is a practitioner himself in fairy seership, and so first of all, I like to say that spirit marriage, everybody that I interviewed, they all had human partners, with the exception of one or two people. So they were in human relationships, and the people that they were in relationships with tended to also be practitioners in their tradition as well. So that really upholds the sort of worldview and the practice. And because of that, because that they're with a human partner and with a spirit beloved, I like to say that spirit marriage is kind of at the outset a very polyamorous practice, right? And you like, human physical polyamory, you've got
Wham's like,
Yeah, I've
you've got negotiations and relationship contracts and all sorts of agreement setting and stuff. It's just maybe unlike human polyamory, where you have to like schedule yourself to the teeth. It's maybe not as much the case with the spirit marriages, because you're interacting with them in more of a trance, or even maybe in your dreams. So it's not quite as
it's much more time effective. You don't have
efficient
you don't,
approach.
you don't have to spend all of your time trying to like rent motel rooms and
Yeah.
and spend lots of money
Yeah.
I was just going to say,
Spend lots of money on like gasoline and stuff.
I've seen a lot of weird things, but none of them have ever tried to gooch me, to my knowledge.
Yet.
But that's just me. Not saying it don't. I've heard weird stories about that Carla Turner, like some reptilian coming and taking the form of her dead husband and like doing weird stuff. I mean, that I'm sure stuff like that happens. There's a dark side to this too. I mean, I'm not saying there's a positive and a dark side. I'm
Yeah,
sure,
well,
like anything.
that's why I focused my research on spirit and marriage, right? We're assuming that by the time that you're marrying one of these beings, you know, love, and trust it. You have done all the discernment practices. You know that it is a valid, verifiable, and a benevolent entity that you want to be in a bonded, intimate relationship with. I mean, before that, right, there's a whole gamut of spirit contact and spiritual intimacy where you're maybe dating around, maybe you're trying to discern, you know, do I want to deepen, do I not want to deepen, whatever. But that's a huge enchilada that, so I'm just focusing on this one particular aspect of it where you've done your due diligence, you want to be in the relationship.
So let me ask you this. I'm sure it's possible to do this. Is it possible to like, Ira did this, I suppose, or whatever her name was. What was her name?
Craddock.
Ida Craddock.
Yeah.
Ida Craddock. To say, to kind of put your feelers out there. I mean, there isn't like, an adult friend finders for the spirit world. But is there some way that you can sort of like put out your shingle and say, hey,
open for business?
Yeah, open for business for non.
How about open for fun?
Yeah, open for.
Well, I mean, like that gets into like a lot of Donald.
Open for astral rubbing. I mean,
there's a few books out on like sex magic and intercourse with spirit. I think there's a new book coming out in May, and I'm totally forgetting the name of the author. I think it might be Jason Miller, on consorting with spirit.
I've interviewed him, yes.
Yeah. So there are practices, and depending on the tradition that you're sitting in, right, that can use sex magic and spiritual intimacy and sacred sexuality practices to just for various purposes, right? Like whether you're working with a familiar spirit and you're bonding to it in a way that brings about certain magical outcomes and workings and practices. But like in Ida's case, Wham, just to, dovetail, and I interviewed Vera Chappelle, who wrote that book.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's an excellent book. And he's really like an expert biographer on her. And he told me that her spirit husband, Soph, was actually the spirit of a deceased man that she knew growing up.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so she said, for whatever reason, she identified him as an angel, maybe because when he crossed over, he, was elevated to a more angelic status, or maybe that was just how she was able to best work with him and sort of grok the situation. But, so, there's an example right there of her stepping into this relationship with this being who I believe, if I'm remembering her story correctly, reached out to her first. So he sort of precipitated the relationship, and then she sort of identified him as this being that she knew, but then also as this sort of angelic, which I would say is maybe the higher self of the more mundane human spirit sort of ghost that she knew in life.
I thought her example was very interesting because it seemed to me that she had undertaken a lot of training, and I think this is key to people who maybe want to try and cultivate this type of relationship. She'd undertaken a lot of training via Theosophical Society and other practices. She'd done. She's a huge brainiac researcher as well. Studying, but then also undertaking a lot of practices, automatic writing, channeling, various energetic practices, and really just kind of was going for it, great guns. And it seemed to me that like I almost got the sense that at a certain point she kind of had developed her psychic faculties enough where he had been just kind of like hanging around. He's like, "Hey, you,
You're ready now."
yeah." And as far as her calling him an angel, it's funny because my the man I call him a young man. He's like, "I'm middle aged," but my friend, he always talks about his deceased lover as being an angel, but it's partly because of how he perceives her, the way that she's kind of like expanded, like you're saying, into this huge, she's kind of like almost kind of like in his mind, kind of like merges with Sophia at the same time. But also in his Christian tradition, and I believe that I was raised Christian as well, that there is this idea that if you have someone who dies in Christ, that they become an angel, right? So I don't know if that was the case with Ida Craddock or not.
Yeah, I mean, I
Either.
think a lot of the language we choose around this is really preconditioned by our culture and our upbringing and our religious, orientation, or at least the religions that's informing us culturally. And I think that, certainly my contact, Gwen, I talk about how he has two faces, and one was this sort of angelic or what sort of an upper world manifestation, and then the other is this sort of underworld or fairy manifestation, light and dark, not good and evil, light and dark, meaning like expansion and then depth, right? And we need both, right? Just like we need light and dark, sun and moon, summer, winter, right? We need that to be in the fullness, right, of our spiritual experience. Jung said that a tree can only grow as high as its roots grow deep. And so, a lot of this for me was really growing my roots deep. And I think one of the primary reasons Gwen showed up for me was because I had been raised in such an upper world tradition, right? Pentecostalism was such a almost entirely exclusively focused on this, ascension kind of Christianity, that even though I had left the Christian tradition, that was still what I was working with. And so, I stepped into the fairy work to really grow myself deeper, to connect to my ancestors, to experience what I like to call endarkenment, right? Being able to be in that fecund, loamy, underworld place where vitality and creation can happen.
And that is the point. That's why I don't know, recently I've become a lot more enamored of the whole idea of yin and yang. They're kind of creating each other, because you think people, shadow material, in our Western society, it's like, oh, this kind of creepy stuff and you're unconscious, but there's plenty of unconscious processes. They need to be unconscious for a reason. I mean, if you had to like consciously beat your heart every moment, you wouldn't get anything else done, right? There's a reason why fetuses are protected, like in the womb, when they're gestating, right? There's plenty of processes that are completely normal and bring life forward, but they're hidden for a reason.
Yeah, it's a mystery. Well, and also like our visual spectrum, right? We don't see everything that's perceivable, right? Because if we did, we would go mad, right? What's on the input? And so we need these filters that help us filter reality and help us filter our perception. The important thing is to just know and name that we have filters, right? And that's that whole know thyself. Like, what are your filters? What are you stepping in with? What are you consciously not wanting to look at? What, there are known unknowns.
The unknown unknown. It's terrible. It's actually true, though, even though that whoever said it. So I wanted to ask a question that was submitted by Farusha, and I'll just read it out. She says, and this has to do more with like a human on human, but again, these unwanted contacts. She said, how to shut down an experienced out-of-body person who knows when you are sleeping aware and ventures in at night in the dream area, then has the unmitigated gall to contact you the following morning with, how'd you sleep last night? With a leer in his voice and a chuckle. Because I've heard this from a number of people where you get, unwanted attention.
Astral sex and out of body travel. I mean, that's not my area of expertise. I'll first of all say that, but I had to learn for myself the skills for gridding and shielding myself on the astral from the unwanted spirit contact. And I did have, and I talk about a little bit in the book, some of my one of my ex-husbands was a pretty adept um, uh, psychically, and there was some unwanted contact there. I mean, that's honestly why I initiated into ceremonial magic, and it's why um, I developed a really robust devotional practice to the goddess, both Isis and to the goddess Kali. So I, have done sadhana, spiritual practice with the goddess Kali for a number of years now. For just, I mean, not only, but one of the byproducts of that is having a really powerful protector deities around you. And what I teach when I work with my students on this is ritual protocols for going into this type of work that really names and calls in your protector deities, knowing who they are, and working with them on a really regular basis, which involves like offerings and devotional practices to them as your protector deities. Which, by the way, Jeffrey, just to dovetail on what you were talking about with the dragons are some of the most powerful protector deities. If you have connection to dragon type energies, they often work as dragons, and nagas or snakes can be very powerful protector deities. So just depending on the tradition and the cosmology that you're working with, protector beings are really important for that.
Because one of the first experiences that I had kind of along these lines, when I was young, and it really opened my eyes to a lot about what could be going down or what could be happening. So I'd had this near-death experience, and 7 years later, my boyfriend at the time, actually it was my birthday, took me to the Asian Art Museum. They were having that Tibetan Buddhist show. Do you know that? I was there, and the reason that I'm able to nail down that it was my birthday is, I don't know if you remember that the monks were making that sand mandala in the courtyard, and the day the lady came in and destroyed the mandala, I was there. Wow. And so I was able to actually contact the museum, and they sent me the information on that, and it was it. And I'd always thought, I knew he'd taken me for my birthday, but I didn't know that it actually was my birthday. So this whole time I'd had like 7 years of having this near-death experience and saying very little about it to anyone who was not extremely close to me, because I hadn't heard anything about near-death experiences, and it was really not the oh, your grandma's there helping you down this corridor of light and all that type of stuff. It was very different, and I never run across anything that was anything like it. So I'm walking around this exhibit and I'm loving it, and then there was like a dark old antique thangka of Palden Lamo, and I was like, that's it. It didn't look anything like that visually, but that person is painting that thangka about what I saw. And so I started to get interested in Tibetan Buddhism, and I ended up living in a Tibetan Buddhist meditation center for, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years. And it had like a Rinpoche living in there. You had been born and raised in Tibet and had escaped to the United States. And he actually landed, it's interesting, I have a lot of like birthday synchronicities. So he'd actually landed in the United States like within a week of the time I was born, so which was kind of weird. Anyway, so we're up there, and he had a girlfriend living with him there, which he was supposed to be like celibate, but you know how these things go. And she actually is one of my big teachers. She still is an incredible practitioner, and really taught me a lot. So I'm there, and it wasn't like a super let's say active place, but there was teachers coming through, various lamas. They give empowerments and everything, and the Rinpoche was very much, she kind of like, oh ho ho, very happy, kind of surface interaction a lot of the time. But I would notice that there were like Western students, and then also Tibetan students there at the center. And I noticed that a lot of, especially the young women, would kind of make it, I don't know, it was kind of like they would get like uncomfortable, talk about him in an uncomfortable manner, Rinpoche, or it seemed a little awkward. There was like this weird tension, but I couldn't really put my finger on it. Anyway, so one night I'm there in my room and I'm sleeping, minding my own business, and I wake up like in a dream, and I'm just like in my bedroom there as I was sleeping, and the door opens and Rinpoche walks in, and I just woke up right away. And it was like this weird sense, like the walls are kind of ringing. And I was like, that's really weird. It was like a very intense dream. So, but I didn't really know what it meant, except for after that, Rinpoche started to treat me with a lot more respect, more kind of straight across. There'd be times like one time they were preparing for a Vajra Yogini empowerment, and he needed someone to help him make some of the ritual objects for the empowerment. And he had all these other students there who, of course, wanted to help him, but he asked me to help him, stuff like that. So he showed me a lot more respect. So I didn't know exactly what had happened, but I knew that, I'd held my own ground, even just by getting out of there where, I think obviously he'd been trained in all this stuff. So if I just tried to encounter him in the dream space, I would have been toast at that point, but I was able to at least get out of there. So I don't know, quite a while after that, there was a couple that moved from out of state. They decided they were well off. They'd been students for years. They decided to sell everything and come live at the center. And the wife was going to whip everything into shape, get Rinpoche teaching, doing empowerments, get them out of schedule, all this stuff. Okay, fine. So one day she asked me to go shopping with her. So we're in the store. She said, Stephanie, I had this dream. I just don't know what it could mean. I was hoping maybe you could tell me. I'm like, well, you could try. I'm not no great shakes at dream interpretation, but sure. She said, well, I was dreaming, and in my dream, Rinpoche came to me and he said, I will give you all this great karma and you'll have all this great empowerment spiritually and everything, but you just have to have sex with me and keep it secret from everyone. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe it means. She's like, no, it can't be that. Okay. But so apparently this is, what his shtick was. And, but it was interesting because around the same time I'd started to have experiences. I don't know why I hate saying this, but, I was around a lot of people at the time, and, different people would have an interest in me. And so I would sometimes have a situation where, I wake up in the middle of the night and kind of get the feeling that like all this erotic energy was directed at me, but it was kind of like unconscious. It felt like it, if you're tuning in on someone like having a wet dream about you, that type of a thing, it wouldn't last that long. And in a number of instances, like the next day, someone would like show a big interest in me that they hadn't before or something, and try and approach me or whatever. And it'd be kind of like, oh. So, but it made me realize that, if you kind of put these things together, if someone, like could wake up and that, a lot, you could have these type of full-on encounters like on the dream plane or whatever. But like you're saying, I think that having, and I like that as an answer, having the structure and tying into a lineage and a tradition with practices that has that tradition of protection is something that can help you.
Yeah, I mean, and even in the tantric lineages that have the protector beings, there is still, there still needs to be consent, and there still needs to be agreement around, and just it's why I have tried to root a lot of this in not just sacred sexuality, but like sex positive agreement making for both, poly and hetero and queer, and like all of the things that we've learned about sex and sex positive culture really center around this idea of consent and agreement making and you know, safe words and all of these kinds of things that really make sure that everybody is um, in consent and in agreement about what's going to happen. And so much misuse of power happens in spiritual communities, right? And that shows up again and again in sexual misconduct, right? Sexual misconduct with people in power and people under them, and the whole nuanced and very blurry area of the astral body, right? In the esoteric body, wherein an advanced practitioner who knows what they're doing can actually take advantage of people, and under the auspices of like, oh, this is an empowerment, or oh, this is a this or that or the other. And if that has not been discussed and agreed upon outside of the scenario, outside of whether it's astral or otherwise, then it's a major red flag. It's a major red flag. Because, you know, one of the critiques of Tantra, both in the West and in the East, is that it was often used by the practitioners were often men who would take women of a lower class or you know, in a role of somebody that was, you know, a student or a seeker, and um, and take advantage of that relationship, right, for boosting their own working or energy body or whatever. And so we have to be really discerning and really careful when we're talking about working in non-ordinary states, right? Whether we're talking about entheogenic or psychedelic work. I mean, there's, you know, plenty of sex scandals in there, in those realms. Whether we're talking about tantra, whether we're talking about, you know, in any of these sort of sacred sexuality practices, can be easily misused. And so it's again, I think why it's so important for the practitioner to really understand their sovereignty, their power, and what they bring to the table. Because that, you know, just because a spirit is expressing interest in you doesn't necessarily mean you want to be in a relationship with them. And being able to push back, right, and set boundaries and say, you know, this is what I am willing to engage in, or this is where I'm willing to take this. It gives us, Orion describes it as a kind of inner velocity that helps us really step from the place of just being a mystic into the place of really being the magician.
No, I really, I was rereading a little bit of what I have on my blog, and I was feeling very spicy one day, and I wrote down like my own rules for sex magic with others. But it's very similar to what you have to say, which is, first of all, you know, develop yourself, and, you know, realize what you bring. I think I even said something like, even if all you're bringing to the relationship is a warm hole, still they need to respect it. But I really believe that, and it's
Stephanie,
really...
I love you so much. I love you so much. That Gemini ascendant just goes woof, just right out there.
But it's true.
It's very true. It's very true.
Terrific of that, Stephanie. You know, you're in the receptive position, right, in that scenario, and therefore the energy of your body, if you're a practitioner at all, your years of a spiritual practitioner at all, your years of cultivation work,
Yes,
your consciousness, your mind, body, spirit complex, that's all of what you're bringing to the table, which for some people and for some spirits, that's food, that's energy, that's vitalism. And so, you know, even if all you're bringing is your vitality, that is a powerful and a potent something to bring.
exactly. Why are they there unless they are interested in what you have to offer. And then, of course, like you're saying, with all the practices that you can do to cultivate your own ethical core, your relationship with your own deities, your various astral body skills, all that type of stuff. That's, like you say, exactly that. It's something that you are bringing to the table, and you should never denigrate yourself, or be around someone who's not going to respect you for that. Even if, and I actually, Alan Greenfield has an interesting book. Actually, he asked me to write the introduction to it. It's called The Grail Within, and he's talking about, he was in, I believe it was the OTO for many years, and also did a lot of sex magic on his own, kind of within that tradition, and then creating his own interpretations of it. But he was talking about practicing with someone who is as adept as you, or you're more or less paired equally. But he was also talking about finding someone that he could practice with who was more naive to the practice, and how this is how grateful he was because of some of her qualities, but then also because there are certain things you can only learn through teaching. So even if you are in a position where someone is more adept than you feel like you are the learning partner, that you never consider yourself less than, because
No, well, this is something that we can actually take a page out of the BDSM playbook, frankly, because in BDSM work, it is the sub that sets the rules and sets the boundaries and determines where and how far and what the scenario is. It's mapped out ahead of time. There is, there are safe words. There's a very clean, ideally, I mean, I'm talking about an ideal scenario, right?
Yeah.
It is very clear, and the person that is in the submissive position is the person actually that's in control. So I think that if you're stepping into a relationship where you're working with an advanced practitioner, a teacher, an elder, or whatever, that they need to take their cues from you. And you need to understand, it needs to be completely transparent and clear what's going to happen beforehand. And there needs to be no question about what is being agreed to. Even if there are esoteric things that might be happening in more of a transmission kind of state, what's happening in the physical body needs to be mapped out and agreed upon.
And I would say even the transmission stuff, I mean, it's difficult because if you haven't had this type of experience before, of course you can't have that kind of informed consent that I mean, that's the nature of the beast. But I think, talking about safe words is very important, because, even if I mean, I've never done I'm a very vanilla person, sorry to say. However, I've always been, and it blows my mind that it's still a thing. I've always been with men that are just like, they want to make sure that you're like still into it and having a good time. I tell a story. It was so stupid, but I've had a long-standing interest in UFOs. So one time, my husband and I were disporting ourselves on the marital bed, and for some reason I started thinking about this one case.
So many visuals. I'm sorry.
I started thinking about this one case of Jacques Fillet's, where Jerry Irwin, he was like in the Air Force or something, and he thought that he saw a plane crash, but it was like a UFO, and he went to try and go investigate. He left a note on his thing. Anyway, he kept having these like incidents of amnesia afterwards. I don't know why I was thinking about that, but I was just kind of like, wow, thinking about this. He's like, hello, dear, are you? And I'm like, oh yeah, sorry.
Are you in there?
But even, just something like that, it's like, you should be checking in with one another. You don't, even if you're, more kind of like a, ongoing couple. I mean, it's just like common courtesy. And plus, you want the person to be having a good time, right?
Yeah, it's connection, right?
Yes, intimacy.
I was just gonna say, and it's intimacy, right? Intimacy looks and constellates a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
I got one, and I'm serious when I ask this. I take this subject seriously, even though sometimes I laugh about it. Does Bigfoot ever come up in any of these situations? Because I've heard different stories about stuff like that. As far as I've interviewed serious people about Bigfoot. I have a book about Bigfoot with interviews full of serious people about Bigfoot who say it's the Nephilim and stuff like that. There's so many different theories about it, but does that subject ever come up in this at all?
I haven't heard of Bigfoot per se. I've heard of other cryptids. I mean, like fairy and mermaid. Like, there's a lot, like the Selkie lore that comes out of the British Isles, right? The seal women that like are seal and then leave their seal skin and come up ashore and marry a human and have human hybrid offspring and then like return to, like that's part of the folkloric accounts. But I haven't heard of Bigfoot per se. But like I'm with you when it comes to um, this idea that our planet. I mean, I'm an animist first and foremost, so our planet is populated by many different consciousness at all strata of being, from the tiniest little mycelium all the way to the largest oceanic bodies. Right? It's all sorts of consciousness. Humans are one consciousness. We probably are not even the most evolved consciousness. I mean, that's an arguable statement, but and that there are otherworldly and sometimes beings that manifest in this world, like the fairy people are anecdotally can appear in this dimension and then sort of move into their own. So and when you look at these folkloric and sort of origin myths of religion, you see again and again these stories of humans and other non-human or otherworldly beings coming together, mating and creating something new and something different. And the case that you just mentioned, the Nephilim, right, are a byproduct of that. And I think that at some point we're all kind of hybridized beings, right? We all carry these kinds of hybridities of consciousness, especially if we're talking about the cosmological origins of the species, right? Because we don't really know how Homo sapien arose. And if you look at like Barbara Mark Hubbard's research, she was a futurist. Um, she talked a lot about conscious evolution and how our species has evolved unconsciously for millennia. And now we're at this sort of tipping point where we have the potential to we kind of became self-aware, Homo sapien sapien. I think therefore I am. And now we're becoming us aware, right? Where we're moving into this next phase of consciousness that is more of we, the us, the collective, the Gaia consciousness, the noosphere of the planet. And I think spirit marriage is one of the key spiritual technologies that has helped get us there historically and will help continue us forward.
You ever heard of David Huggins? There's a documentary about him, Loving Saucers. He paints pictures of his alien encounters, and some of them are pretty sexual. But if you haven't, I have a book, and then there's a I've interviewed the guy that made the documentary, but basically he ran into some alien situations and claims he has hybrids. He seems very down to earth, so I think there's something to it, but it's pretty interesting. If you've never seen it, it's called Love and Saucers.
Love and Saucers. I'll have to check that out.
It's actually a really good film. It's actually
he's amazing. He paints some pretty wild stuff, and one of them there is like a Bigfoot creature.
That is the thing. There is a creature. Jeffrey, I was telling you that I had done a couple of talks on or podcasts on 6 Degrees of John Keel. We've been looking at sexy Bigfoot, fantastic Bigfoot, gender Bigfoot. But in the first one that we did, we talk about the Guru Yeti, which is like found in Nepal mostly. And it's this folkloric tradition where you have the 3 different types of kind of like Sasquatchy beings. And the smallest one is the most similar to humans. They will kidnap human beings and take them in their cave and initiate them as shamans and give them transmission of various psi and magical powers and stuff. But part of this can be like a sexual initiation too. So if you want to look up the Guru Yeti, but I was I don't know. I had posted a picture of David Huggins, or I forget how it came up. Anyway, Ben Jaffe is an anthropologist looking at Tibetan traditions, and he's like, "Yeah, David Huggins has a little guru yeti in the background of one of his encounters with Crescent in the forest."
There was a native lady here from Ontario or something, but we had told her about something hit our bed, and I got up with a flashlight and looked around, and I didn't see anything. I thought something fell from a shelf. Something did the same thing to the RV. But anyway, we told this native lady, and she was just like, "Well, just do them all." I mean, that was her response. Like, what did you just say? Like,
Oh my
she was
gosh.
just like, just go with it. Or whatever. It's like, I didn't know it was something that was trying to gooch us because I hit the bed. I thought it was a dead grandmother or something. But this lady's just like, do them all. It's like, calm down, lady. You know? But I think we have some Bigfoot stuff. But and the thing about you're saying, I know the subject about transforming into angels when you die in light. My experiences have seen these beings of light leave my house. I've seen them in the heavens, completely sober, not even on weed, completely sober, beings of light. So there may be something to that, like a Cocoon, Ron Howard, like I always say. That's what it is, the Ron Howard movie with Cocoon. But it's a fascinating subject. I have trouble trusting humans in general. So just invisible things, I'm like, I don't trust you either, invisible a-hole, whatever, you know. Life's hard enough. Life's hard enough, and human relationships. Throw it in weird ones. I don't know. I don't think psychologically I can handle it. But it's fascinating. And what is the future of this? Are you gonna write other books on it, or you go to different subject matter?
Well, first of all, I just want to say, Jeffrey, it's not a practice for everybody, right? Like, not every relationship looks different for everybody. Like, some people don't want to ever get married to a human, let alone a spirit, right? Some people only want to marry spirits. Some people only want to marry humans. It's like, it is a smorgasbord, right, of potential relationship constellations and potentialities. I have a course, Spirit Marriage 101, that I teach for people that are interested in this. I run it live, and I also have a self-study course that's coming out in the next month. I have a group program where people can come together and learn deepening practices from me, as well as meet other folks that are involved in the practice. And as for future research, I have a colleague of mine who's a clinical sexologist, and she and I are looking at putting together a study on that sort of broader spiritual intimacy. So I focused just on the marriage, and she focused some of her research on objectum sexuality, which is when humans have bonded intimate relationships with with animate objects, or with non-human objects. So we're going to put together a study where we're going to be doing a clinical research exploration of spiritual intimacy, or when humans are having these kind of erotic, intimate relationships with other
people that marry walls in a train depot. Like, I've heard weird stories.
bury the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
Actually,
your power goes.
I think her name is Angela. I found she was one of her research subjects. So yeah.
Yeah.
What's the link for all this stuff? We got like 5 minutes, so we're gonna be closing out. But it's been great having you on, and we appreciate it so much. And what's the link so people can access all this?
So spiritmarriage.com is the link for the book. There is a place on there for people to share their stories if they're having experiences that they want to, because I'm constantly still collecting, information and data, as well as if they have folkloric accounts that you're like, oh, you should totally know about this group of people. And then my practice, where I support people in spirit marriage type relationships, which I call normalizing the paranormal, is drmeganrose.com, which is just my name all spelled out.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a great show, and it's definitely a fascinating subject. And also coming up, we got Cliff Dunning coming on about marijuana and men's prostates. So that should be good. I made sure Jay was with me with that one.
Yeah, thank you. Because like, what the hell do I know?
Yeah.
It's like no,
Wham's just sitting there the whole time.
no anal probes. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have a book,
No.
Probes Happen. I have a
No.
book, Probes Happen. It's filled with serious UFO alien interviews. And I have Probes Happen again. It's the second book. So probes do happen.
Oh.
Which, by the way, one of the things I wanted to say to Dr. Rose, I'm a doctor too. I just don't use my title on my whatever. And you seem to have a very similar background to what I do. I work a lot with discarnate entities and dead people and stuff, but very rarely has sex ever come up. It's just, I mean, there have been I had one partner who died, and she's come back a couple times, and there's been like a sexual edge around her, but it's been really clear that it's just to get my attention. So it's like, that's just not something that has happened with me particularly, at least that I can remember. But a lot of what you've talked about tonight tallies in general ways with the way in which I found that you work with discarnate entities generally. So, this is just like an additional aspect of, I know Stephanie was probably sitting there going, why isn't Wham not saying more? And it's like, well, she was saying all of it. So I didn't need to say very much, and
I was just gonna say, like I said, eroticism is not everybody's experience, even in spirit marriage, right?
Right. Yeah.
Or even in regular marriage.
Right.
I'm just processing it all. Like what?
In my intimate physical relationship, sex is a big part of stuff a lot of times, but not with spirit.
Yeah, and it can change too. Like I would say, in my personal experience with my spirit partner, there was like I said, it was a strongly erotic connection at the beginning, but there was a lot of transmission and activation that was happening during that time. And then it shifted quite significantly. And after the marriage, eroticism is almost non-existent in the dynamic. And I think, I won't go into all the reasons why, but I think that was part of the arc of what was happening through the indwelling and attunement process.
All right, everybody. Well, I got to close out. You're listening to United Public Radio, 107.7 FM New Orleans. And next week, I believe Micah Dank's returning. He was here at one point. It was a weird story because it was storming really bad. And
that guy.
Yeah. It was storming really bad, and this dude's coming on about the Bible. And I always get crap because I call the show Church of Mabus. So I'm like, we're gonna do a Bible show. We're gonna
He's the guy with the weird presentation.
And it's storming really bad. Like
I just thought that God shut him down. God was like,
and everything's fine. We're airing with the storm. He's doing his presentation 5 minutes in, and he drops.
Not only does he drop, he's like gone. It's like somebody booted him right off.
I was like, God,
we'll have to see if that happens again.
I'm kidding.
And it was like it was a Eugenia Macer story moment.
Yeah, he's coming back. So hopefully we will give glory to the Lord.
Okay.
Yes. All right, everybody. Have a good weekend. Oh yeah, if you haven't seen the Batman, 3 hours. It's like Lord of the Rings, but it's really worth the watch. It's on HBO Max. Paul Dano's the Riddler, and it's crazy as hell. God, it's good. And I hope they use that Joker, because I can't believe I forget the actor's name, but I've seen him and stuff. I was even surprised it was this dude, but it's really good. The Riddler is just crazy as hell. But everybody have a good weekend. Take care. Too. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Wham. Thanks, JoJo Montado. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.